Anu, welcome to Easy Conversations. Thank you for joining me. I'm excited to have you on and talk today and learn about your story. I think there's a lot of meaning behind some of the work you've been doing and the journey you've been on. And before we get into all of that, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share a little bit with us about who you are and what's brought you here in your current chapter of life.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation and to obviously share my journey because I just feel that we all have a unique journey. And, I always talk to people and e- everybody's fascinating. The whole stories are fascinating. But then it's when people start to say, well, I experienced this when I was younger, but it's no way as bad as some of the trauma that I hear
Mm,
about. And I just think, well, yeah, we shouldn't really be comparing traumas here. Like we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to what others have been through because at the end of the day, we all have our unique journey, whether it's something that happened to you as a child or, if it's something that you're going through at the moment, some abuse, or if
mhm,
you're in a war zone at the moment, it's all going to impact our mental health. Trauma is trauma. And
mhm,
we all know that now. Before we used to associate PTSD with the veterans post war. But now we know that it's the same symptoms that we all struggle from, even if
mhm,
we've had childhood sexual abuse. So, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I'm here to spread the light and the knowledge that trauma is real.
mm,
And, we've all been impacted by it to some degree. Some people may have been impacted by it through just something negative that
mm,
your teacher might have said to you
mm,
that you won't amount to nothing in your life, to just some bullying that you may have experienced as well at school from a gang of people who were bullying you.
mm,
So this is why I'm here to obviously shed the light. So my journey did consist of childhood trauma. It
mm,
was childhood sexual abuse at the age of 3, and it basically shaped the whole way that I lived my life. My whole worldview was shaped by this belief that I wasn't good enough, and
mm,
that any problems that ever arose, then I wouldn't talk about them. I'd suppress them, push them under the carpet, because that's what my perpetrator instilled into me. When he was doing this horrid things to me, he said to me to not tell anybody because
mm,
there'll be implications. I'll get hurt or my parents would be hurt.
mm,
And that shaped my whole life, my whole relationships that I had as a consequence of that. I just weren't able to communicate. And that ruined everything. It
mm,
ruined my ability to trust. It ruined my ability to trust people. And likewise, people didn't trust me because I just wasn't able to express myself, my
mm,
feelings, my emotions, my thoughts, because I didn't feel that they were worthy enough. And so I just feel that whatever happens to us as a child, it has such a huge impact to our life today.
mhm,
So that's why I am now guesting a lot. I'm also a trauma coach where I'm helping people through their own traumas.
mm,
And I'm also involved in like filmmaking as well, because I'm hoping that with my story, I can then have on the screen so that people can obviously learn
mhm.
from it visually, because I do have a book out there, which is the same name, Victim to Victor, where I share my journey and I also share what it took for me to heal from that journey as well. But yeah, so that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that. Thank you for kind of laying the foundation for why you're doing what you're doing. Now, you talked about how those early childhood experiences shaped your life and how you approached relationships. But at what point did you get to the realization? Because I think inherently we all know that there's something going on, something that needs to be healed. And sometimes we are unable to find the courage to confront those things,
Mhm.
even though we're repeating similar behavioral patterns or beliefs. But what
Yeah.
allowed you to get to that point where not doing something was not working anymore?
Mm. So I had a few rock bottom situations, and I describe them as rock bottom because I just never felt like there was a way out. I
Mm,
thought the only way out was to end my life both of these times. And it was those being in that real dark and low state that like I was either going to die,
mm,
but I ended up in A&E and casualty both times. So, I never died. At the time, I didn't realize that the universe had different plans for me. I just thought that I was actually a bit disappointed the fact
mm,
that I woke up.
mm,
I was just, whatever. It was always to do with like drugs and getting intoxicated. That was my way to escape and to hopefully escape my life for good. So the fact that I survived, I still continued to live my life the way that I did. I was stuck in this trauma cycle where I was just living on autopilot. There was no
mm,
conscious way of living. There was no intention as to what I did. Everything that I did, it was just like as a form of escapism. So I was working 70, 80-hour weeks because that was my way of just keep going and just keep doing. Like the more that I did, the more I was able to escape the
mhm,
dark thoughts that I felt. So I was always overworking, and from the outside, it looked great for people. I remember being told like just how successful I was
mm,
because I was working less. I was earning loads of money, and then I was able to then fund a lot of travel. So
mm,
I was traveling a lot, and I did get to experience beautiful places in the world. Obviously, that was actually the light. At the end of the tunnel is the fact that I got to see the world because even that it was my flight. I was constantly escaping. So it was a flight response of the nervous system response. And yeah, so I was overworking, overachieving. My relationships were just a disaster every time because I was on autopilot,
mm,
because I was vulnerable. I wasn't communicating my needs or how I was feeling. Then I was attracting these people into my life who were able to take full advantage of that. These were
mm,
controlling, manipulative people who came into my life, and they were obviously drawn to my vulnerability. And so they took full advantage of that, which is why all my relationships were just toxic and just so undeserving. I wasn't able to obviously express my needs. So I was a people pleaser. I was just, whatever they wanted to do, I was just following them. I didn't have a voice. If I was sad, I'd just suppress myself because again, like in my relationships, it became the freeze response of the nervous system.
mm,
And it's crazy when I reflect back because it's the nervous system trauma responses, it's your fight, flight, and freeze and fawn responses. In each aspect of my life, that's exactly what I was doing.
mm,
And it was actually in a couple of the previous relationships that I had that one of them consisted of a lot of betrayal and deceit, where it got me really angry. So I
mm,
started fighting for the first time in my life. And another
mm,
one, I experienced financial abuse where he stole a lot of money from me. And
mm,
rather than, I was angry by this point. So rather than keep quiet, I just had enough. I was like, right,
mm,
I'm actually going to fight. So something inside of me developed where I actually took this guy to court.
mm,
And it was so stressful at the time because I've never ever stuck up for myself like this before. But I pursued and I won. And that was like the best feeling that I ever had. And I feel like, when I stood there in court and the judge could see straight through him, he
mm,
was a narcissist and she was
mm,
challenging him.
mm,
And it just felt so sweet. I was like, oh my God, the judge actually believes me. I have somebody here who's sticking up for me. And
mm,
it felt like my power had come back finally in my life, finally had power, and control. And I guess that was the start of me then wanting to pursue this journey of regaining my power and control and regaining my identity to understand
mm,
who I was, who is Anu? Because I'd lost myself through the whole
mm,
process of being on autopilot, having that trauma response. So yeah, that was a sweet moment, and I'll always remember it. And
mm.
even till this day, this perpetrator, he's paying me back to this day. Like, I have money coming into my account, and again, it's just a sweet reminder every month of the moment that I regained my power.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because you're touching on this judge seeing how you had been treated in a way, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes we try to go about this journey alone, and sometimes we need people that can support us.
Yeah,
And it could be what you're doing for people in the terms of coaching, or it could be a therapist, could be a family member, it could be a friend, but someone that perhaps can help you at times, because trying to do it alone doesn't always work, right? And so that's what I'm hearing there. But so you had that experience. What did then you start doing for your own healing? Because obviously there's, from that time till now, I'm assuming there's been a lot of healing work that's taken
yeah.
place. What did that look like for you?
So it first started when I mentioned about a couple of my ex-partners who
Hmm.
betrayed and deceived me. So it started when I had to leave Manchester, which was a city that I was living in, because
Yeah.
there was like death threats, and I feared for my life being there. And it was just leaving that and coming back home to where I was born in Coventry, and just me kind of expressing my journey to my cousin, and she recommended her healer to me.
Mm,
At the time, I just thought it was woo. I was thinking, oh, a healer, what's a healer going to do? And by that point, I'd already tried counseling.
mm,
I'd already been to my doctors, and they prescribed me anxiety and antidepressant drugs. And they then sent me off to do some CBT therapy. Nothing worked. It
mm,
was all just like, so I had zero faith in the fact that a healer could help me. But she did.
mm,
I remember attending my first session, and she was just so sweet in the questions she was asking me, and I just remember crying, just nonstop. And she did a lot of healing work from then on. I had weekly sessions with her where we did Reiki healing, we did emotional freedom therapy, and it was all such effective work. These are like practices that they're not even recommended under any of the guidance here. And I just think, for a lot of us, they could be the most miracle practices that we experience, because we know trauma's stored in the body. And by us going to counseling, it's great talking about our problems, and it's great, coming up with action plans as to how to solve our current problems. But how about the body? How will we heal the body? How will the trauma come out of the body? And that's where a lot of these spiritual practices become so important.
mm,
And that's where Reiki really helped me. If basically what my healer found was that all my chakras were blocked. So my energy was trapped. Nothing was flowing in my body. We are energy. We're just a bundle of energy, and our energy needs to flow. And so, and when it releases, there's just so much that goes on internally. Like, for me, it was the heaviness, like the heaviness was going eventually. And I'd always struggled with poor circulation, and I'd always struggled with sinus problems as well. So I had so many ailments because of this trapped energy. And as I was healing, I just found that, like, my hands were getting warm on my nose and my feet, and like my sinuses were unclearing as well. And like, as a consequence of that, I was just feeling better, like within my body. And I'd always stored excess weight as well,
mm,
because even though I'd always been at the gym, I'd always been running, but I was very chubby. And
mm,
I realized that even like stored trauma, it can make you quite chubby.
mm,
And so my physique was getting better as well. So it just has so many benefits. And then I was obsessed with healing from then on.
Mm,
And so even though that was all the energy work that I did, I had another, these are all recommendations. So I had another friend who spoke about Tony Robbins, and then
mm,
I attended his events, and then I then learned all about personal development, learned all about our limiting beliefs and how they hold us back. So I
mhm,
was able to then reset my beliefs to more positive beliefs about myself. And then I looked at, my values, I looked at, what my needs were, and it just helped to empower me as a
mm,
whole. And it wasn't just like a quick process. You're talking like a whole kind of decade of different therapy practices. And because I've got such a growth mindset, I'm one of them where if something's working for me, I want to learn it. And so
mhm,
I'd always go and do my courses and learn more about these modalities so that I could actually talk about them, which is why my book became my book, because I was
mm,
then able to talk about all of these modalities within my book to show
mm,
people that, we don't have to just stick to the medical guidelines. We can
mm,
actually find our own ways to heal. And there's so many different ways to heal.
mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I appreciate that because what I'm hearing from you is you often have to put yourself out there to learn different ways of healing. And to your point, everyone's what works for some people may not work for others, right? So you have to find what works best for you. But it doesn't stop there, right? Because the other thing you've shared with me is the triggers are still there.
Mm,
And this is a lifelong journey, right? And I often encounter that when I'm talking to people after they've done a little bit of healing work, they'll say something like, well, I'm still getting triggered. And that's part of it, right? That's part of the journey of you've healed something, but then something else may emerge that perhaps requires your conscious attention and hasn't been there.
mhm,
So, I've experienced that personally too, right? The challenges keep coming up, which I think is good, keeps me on my toes and keeps me
mhm,
curious and open to learning and working through those things. So, what has it been like for you? Because as we're touching
mhm.
on, the triggers pop up. What do they mean for you? How do you deal with them and work through them?
Absolutely. Triggers can be quite daunting because
Mm,
all they are, they're just memories that come up, trapped memories that were stored in our bodies that then come up because something's reminded you of that. And so I always say that, they're there for us to become aware of maybe areas that we haven't yet healed or areas that still need a bit of attention or work on. And with me, my main triggers always come up in relationships, whether
mm,
it's relationships with my family or with my partner or with my friends. And it's always to do with the fact that I don't feel respected or I don't feel enough. And it's always to do with a lack. And then I've got to really draw attention to that and think, okay, so why am I still allowing people to make me feel this way? So that's when I know that, I have to keep my practices on. I have to do the work on myself. And sometimes, life takes over and my practices might not be at the forefront of my mind. And then
mm,
when I get triggered, it reminds me, okay, I need to now do a 10-minute grounding practice or a hypnotherapy practice or, do some gratitude or affirmations to really bring me back to myself. And so that's why for triggers for me, I see as a blessing in disguise rather than something which is daunting and
mm,
scary and something that can actually affect your nervous system because I know it can with people and
mm,
just be aware of that.
mm,
And this is why it's good to listen to these podcasts because it reminds you that you're not alone on this
mhm.
journey.
Yeah. And coming back to the original experience that you shared, as comfortable as you're talking about it, because I see for a lot of people that can be a block of not being able to move forward, or there can be anger and resentment of around the situation. So you shared at the
Yeah.
beginning your own experience with sexual trauma. How were you able to navigate that and release that experience? And how do you feel about the person who even did it? right? So how
Mm,
have you made sense of all of that for yourself? And what have you needed along the way to continue to heal with respect to that experience?
yeah. There was a lot of anger at first. And I remember even saying to everyone around me that I just wish I had a machine gun and I could actually go and shoot all these pedophiles and, all these people who abused me. And that
Mm,
included all my ex boyfriends as well. And that was my anger. I had a lot of fight in me, like I absolutely hated, I had a lot of hate. But then
mm,
as I was healing and learning the journey of healing, I learned forgiveness.
mm,
And I was a bit like, I can't forgive them. They're mean, they're horrible people. But it was about forgiving myself and to not be carrying so much hate because it's only me that's suffering. They're not suffering. I'm carrying that upon myself and it's weighing me down. So I need to let go of all that guilt, the shame, the hate,
mm,
because it's not mine to carry. So that was a big awakening. And again, it wasn't an overnight fix. It took me quite some time. And the only way that I was able to then forgive them, I did eventually forgive them. It was by
mm,
working on myself. It was
mm,
by accepting myself and by loving myself. Because how many of us can do that? How many of us can actually look in the mirror and actually just love what you see? That was hard for me. I just
mm,
kept thinking about the things that I hated about myself. But there's just so much synchronicity between loving yourself and forgiving. And I just think that, if we can learn to love, accept, and embrace ourselves, then you will see the world totally differently.
mhm,
And yeah, I struggled a lot from the sexual trauma. It impacted my whole way of being, where as soon as I hit a legal age to have sex, I disrespected my body. I became
mm,
like a nymphomaniac. I was
mm,
just like having sex left, right, and center, unprotected sex. And I even was having sex with women because I didn't know who I was. And I
mhm,
thought that was my way that I had, in order to feel accepted and to feel validated, that I needed to give my body to people.
mm,
And I was doing that so easily, and
mm,
people didn't even have to earn it. I was a troubled soul and I put myself in some very dangerous situations.
mm,
But that was because of what happened to me. So, when you're thinking back at that, you're going to have hate for the person who caused that.
mm,
It's only natural. But then when you start to understand the life pattern, when you start to understand how trauma influences your whole decisions and your whole worldview, then it's easy for you to then let go of that shame and guilt and to forgive whatever happened to you.
mm,
My perpetrator died when I was young, so I didn't really have a chance to even take him to
mm,
court or to bring this all to justice because he died. So
mm,
I guess that happened probably that was his karma. He had
mm,
an early death because I wasn't the only one he obviously abused. He must have done it to many other children as well.
mm,
So that's his journey. That's his karma that he served. And so that's the way to look at it. We are in control of our own lives and our own destiny. Don't
mm.
ever let anyone influence that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate you touching on the forgiveness piece. The other thing I sometimes see is people will also blame themselves.
And
Was there, and you talked about perhaps even some of the choices you were making. How do you put all of that together? And was there also, and did you look at forgiving yourself also along the way?
but that came quite later in my life
Mm,
because I felt so ashamed of all my life choices up until that point because of, like I said, just disrespecting my body to such a degree that I felt like filth. The only thing that was missing was just maybe becoming a prostitute. Maybe that would have probably been a better way for me because at least I would have been making something from it. So it was hard for me to forgive that because I just felt dirty and
mm,
it's so low. But that's what healing and personal development,
mhm,
that's what it does to you. It enables
mm,
you to then understand that it wasn't my fault that I
mm,
became that way.
mm,
And it never is.
mm,
I was 18 at the time, but I still felt like I was a little girl. And I know that, 18 is an adult age, but I just felt like mentally I was always a decade behind anyway.
mm,
And again, that's because that's what trauma does to you. You're not fully developing, are you, when you undergo trauma, and it really does slow down your development. And that's how I felt.
mm. And you've talked about your book, so you obviously put your story together and you've navigated the shame, but it's still sometimes it opens us up for judgment when we're that vulnerable and we're sharing our story. How do you navigate that? That as much as you've done your healing, you recognize that you've made choices and you've made peace with them. And I'm sure you're also at that point. If others are judging you, it has nothing to do with you, but there's still that the shame can still creep in, right? I see that
Mm.
for myself too, that as much as I can own things that I've done, it can still come up every now and then. So how do you navigate that piece, and how were you able to work past that to then put your story in your book and then share that with the world?
So sharing my story wasn't easy at all. And it was hard writing it anyway,
Mm,
because, it was the first time I'd ever been so vulnerable in
mm,
expressing myself. And it was hard to express myself because that wasn't a skill that I'd acquired from a young age. That's something that I learned over
mm,
time. And my editor was helping me. So I was really grateful that I had somebody
mm,
who I could turn to for support and for guidance. And even when the book went out, I shriveled and I went and hid because I felt so ashamed that it had gone out. I'd already had members of my family telling me to not publish it because it was going to bring shame to the family.
mm,
So I remember last minute I had to take out certain people out of my book. So none of my family is really mentioned in there. And I remember people questioning, saying, "Where were your mom and dad?" Thinking,
mm,
Lord, I didn't want my family mentioned in there because really I felt like it was my story and my journey and it was mine to
mm,
tell. It wasn't me blaming people or bringing people in who didn't really have much of an involvement in my journey.
mhm,
And so I experienced a lot of trauma even when my book went out, and I had a, I had to hire a healer, I had to hire a coach, I had therapy. So I had
mm,
like so many different sources of support to help guide me those months following the release of the book, because all my family members, extended family, and people who I'd been born and raised with, they all read this book. And a lot of people had not much to say because it made them feel uncomfortable that
mm,
that this was going on within the household. But it was my only way to express what had really happened, because up until that point people thought I was crazy.
mm,
They thought that I'd lost the plot and that I was a loose cause. So I had so many people who just thought that I was this wild child. Whereas when they read that book, they then understood why I was this wild child. And I had so many people reach out and
mm,
apologize and say, "I'm so sorry, that I had no idea this went on in your life. And why
mm,
didn't you tell anybody?" I was thinking, because you bury it, it's
mhm,
not something that you're openly telling people about, because you bury it, because that's your way of coping and surviving.
mhm,
And they say as well, it takes an average of 3 decades for any traumatic incidents to actually come out anyway. So, it's going to come out later on in life. So that was a lot of trauma that I had to work through upon the release of the book. And even now, um, shame I don't actually experience anymore.
mm,
I feel I'm so empowered now to talk about my journey and to talk about everything, that I feel shame is something that you have to work through. Up until probably last year, I was still so ashamed of talking about my suicide attempts.
mm,
But then by actually openly talking about it a few times, even, writing about it as well, by getting it out of my system, it
mm,
then released the shame.
Mm,
So I always say to people now that if you want to release any shame, any guilt, you have to get it out of your system,
mm,
because the more it stays trapped in your system, the more it's going to haunt you and the more shame and guilt you're going to carry. So you need to release it. And
yeah.
that is my way of releasing it. And I don't get ashamed of anything now. I feel so
Mm,
empowered. It's
mhm.
like, it's such a free feeling. Like, I
Yeah.
actually feel free.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, and I've talked to one of my close friends, and we try to share a lot of our stories, and that's the one thing we concluded was when you're able to own it yourself, it doesn't have
Fully.
that power over you anymore, right? Otherwise,
Yeah.
it's just
No.
this one thing that you're constantly running from. And part of what I'm hearing from you is the purpose of putting out the book was to express it all. But why put it out in the form of a book? What was your inspiration behind writing this book? Apart from obviously sharing your story, but what else was
Mm.
there for you?
Because I had my first child, Noah,
Mm,
and
mm,
I wanted something there for him to read when he's old enough to understand his mom's journey and what she went through.
mm,
And that, I've actually got a section on him as well in my book. And I show, he's 8 years old now, and I show him the book, be like, look, and he says, "That's my name, Mama." And he reads his section. Obviously, there's nothing about the abuse in the section.
okay.
I said, "It's fine. You can read the rest of the book when you're older." But that was why I wrote it. I mean, I had him in 2018, and I always knew that I had a lot of healing to do.
Mm,
And so I was working with a coach at the time on the back end of one of Tony Robbins' Date with Destiny seminar that I did. And it was him that asked, he was basically guiding me to journal. He said, you need to journal. And he said, you'll be amazed at what comes up. And just as I started journaling, all these crazy incidences came up that I totally forgotten about. I was thinking, oh
mm,
my goodness, yeah, I remember that happening. And it's like just a memory bank, just flowing one after another. And then that became like 80 pages. And I just thought, right, this has to be a book because
mm.
I've written so much and there's so much that's gone on here now. And yeah, so I always say to people as well, start journaling because you never know where it will lead to. And I just think that when we write a book as well, it's there for life.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one could take that away from us.
And why was it important? I can appreciate what I'm hearing partially too is your son was obviously a huge inspiration for your healing as well.
Mm.
But why put a section of for him in the book? What was the reason? I know you said you'd want him to read it, and he's obviously
Mhm.
a part of your life, but how does he fit into the entire piece, the picture?
He was my motivation to needing to heal.
Mm,
Because I had him and I was still a troubled and lost soul. I mean, I suffered from postnatal depression as well when he was born because
mm,
so much of the trauma came back. And I remember just experiencing just so much pain because I just couldn't believe like how awful I was feeling. And I felt so guilty for it as well because it should have been the happiest time of my life. But I was depressed. So
mm,
it was because of that. It was because I knew that that wasn't the way that I wanted to live my life. And so he gave me that motivation to go and start this journey of
mhm,
taking care of myself, my mental health, and to put myself first. Because up until that point as well, like, it's a culture thing as well, where we're taught to put other people's needs before ours. And even when Noah was born, I was thought, right, okay, this is all about my boy now. I quit work and I just put him first. But then was that really the way that I need, that to actually live my
mhm,
life and to heal? No, you have to put yourself first because
yeah,
unless you're healthy and happy and unless you can be fully present, then what are you going to give your child? And so I'm just this big believer now. We got to fill our cups first, and then
mm,
after that, we have more to give to others, more abundance and more positive energy.
mhm.
Otherwise, what are we going to give them? But we're not going to have much to give them.
And it's important to recognize that because I think a lot of people, as you're sharing, get lost in that whole thing. I need to put my family or my children first. and then there's some level of guilt around pouring into yourself. But exactly to your point, you need to fill your cup because you can't pour from an empty cup. What message would you like to share with people who get stuck in that mindset of, okay, I have to do for others? Like, even simply, like, I see a lot of times people will struggle to make time to go exercise, for example, because they have, they want to be there for their children. Want to spend time with their children. And often I like to point out is, are we focused on quantity or are we focused on quality? Right. So if we're not feeling good, doesn't matter how much time we spend with our children or our loved ones, there's no quality in that time.
Not
So
at all.
how do
Yeah,
you look at it,
absolutely.
and what do you like to share with people in that space?
Exactly that. Yeah.
Mm,
So, yeah, I'm a firm believer that it is about quality. And I'd rather spend a good solid 1 or 2 hours where I'm present and fulfilled with my children than spend the whole day with them where I'm feeling resentful, tired, exhausted. And this is why I'm a firm believer in that, in the
mm,
fact that as they grow older, what are they going to remember? Are they going to remember those 8 hours of an exhausted, tired, frustrated parent who kept shouting at them? Or are they going to remember that
mm,
1 hour that you spent with them doing like a Lego or a puzzle?
mm,
It's going to be that 1 hour. They don't have that big of a memory to remember too long anyway. And that's what it's all about. It's about creating those memorable moments with them.
mm.
And you don't need all the hours God sends to do that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. So what is your hope now moving forward, right? So you're obviously working with people, you've got your book out there. How are you inspiring others, and what is your message of hope centered on?
I just feel every day I'm still learning more and more about myself and about
Mm,
the world. And the way that I'm thinking now, it wasn't how I was thinking 6 months ago. And so I just feel like, we're constantly evolving as humans. And I used to be very goal orientated, setting myself objectives, putting pressure on myself to hit these objectives.
mm,
And, if I didn't, then it would be self sabotage. I'd make myself feel so bad. But I'm not like that anymore, thank God. I now go with the flow. I feel so aligned with my life that I don't have harsh goals anymore. I've got things that I want to do. And if the universe sends me there, then great. Like, let's go there if the universe wants to take me there. But I'm not going to give myself a harsh time if I'm not there by a certain time. So I've got obviously projects that I'm working on, like I mentioned about like a movie project. I've
mhm,
already got a movie that we've developed, but it's like a sci-fi thriller, so nothing to do with my healing stuff. But that was just a project that we did to get into the whole filmmaking. And
mm,
on the back end of that, we have a filmmaking non-profit that we're helping people. We're building a community to help people so that they can have a safe community that they can network with other filmmakers in. And I'm just loving the whole podcasting network as well, the
mhm,
platforms, because I feel like, I don't know, this is debatable, but I feel like a lot of the younger generation now are resorting more to audio and visuals rather than books.
mhm,
And yeah, so this is why I don't really have much of an intention to write another book right now, but who knows in the future. So I'm
mm,
really enjoying just having these conversations because, again, by talking about it, not only are we healing still,
mm.
but we're learning so much and so much comes out. And you just think, wow, where was that hidden? And so much nuggets of wisdom can come out when we talk. So I do believe that, we all should be talking more.
For sure, for sure. And we talked about triggers earlier and what was coming up for me as you were sharing that. And I think part of it is something that I constantly try to navigate myself is there's still that tendency at times to fall into old patterns or behaviors. And even though it could happen in a very smaller snapshot of time, you're not living it out consistently as opposed to what it was like before. How do
Mm.
you notice those moments? And do you sit down and often reflect on, okay, what is going on? What's changed? Am I not paying attention to something? Am I getting complacent? Or is this
Mm,
just another new test I need to work through and navigate? Because I feel like the shame can, as we've already talked about, can constantly creep in and take us out
mm.
in different ways if we're not paying attention.
Very true, very true. And that's when I know that I'm no longer living on consciously and that I'm back into my autopilot mode.
Mm,
It's when I do get triggered. And there's certain people in my life who still can do that for me. Unfortunately, you can't choose your family. I know that. And that's where a lot of my triggers still are.
mm,
And, and so it's a constant reminder that even though I might be, I might, would I say I'm healed? Is that even a word that we should be saying? Maybe it's the fact that I'm still healing,
mhm,
but the fact that these people are still triggering me and I still get wound up, sometimes even tearful.
mm,
I'm questioning, thinking why, why are they being this way? It's a reminder from the universe that it's not really a reflection on me and that
mm,
I shouldn't be taking that on. So I'm thankful in the fact that I don't let them make me feel shameful or guilt anymore, but it still does affect us. It still makes
mhm,
me feel like low. I still get
mm,
those feelings of emptiness or that I'm not enough.
mm,
So that's when I know that I need to do some practices to fill my cup again. And I'm very quick on Spotify and Apple and YouTube. I've just got so many different practices saved. Some beautiful, like Joe Dispenza practices and some Michael Seeley hypnotherapy tracks
mm,
that, and they're only, they're short, like 10, 20 minutes. So it doesn't take too much of your time, and I'll just put those on, and then
mm.
it'll then help to reset me and come home to myself. And it's not going to take that problem away, but it brings you back in balance. And that's what I would recommend everyone to have, are quick micro tools that you can turn to during times of triggers or distress,
Mhm.
because it's the thing that's going to transform your whole way of living. It's not about attending a 1 or 2 week retreats anymore, I believe. I've done all that, because then when you get back to your home life, you kind of go back to your old ways. For me, it's about instilling these micro practices into our life so that we can live better and be better.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all of that. And what role do boundaries play in your life? And sometimes people are focused on setting boundaries for others, but what I've realized more and more over time is I need to have boundaries for myself. And that
Mm.
means how much I'm willing to interact with certain people. What are the thoughts I'm letting into my head and ruminating on? Boundaries are really helpful, but keeping them for myself. And even if I have boundaries for other people, knowing that it's my responsibility to enforce them, I can't expect other people to just follow through. And expectations are another recipe for disaster. So, how do you make sense of all of that for yourself? And what role do boundaries play?
It's been huge. I spoke about people pleasing, about
Mm,
how I've always put other people's needs before mine. I had to learn boundaries, because
mm,
otherwise there was no way that I was ever going to put my needs first. And having boundaries in place is the ability to say no, as we all know. It's the ability to, if somebody asks us to do something and we don't resonate with it, it's the ability to actually respect that and not do this thing anyway. And it's the ability to protect ourselves from people who may be energy vampires, or toxic people, that whenever you're around them it makes you feel so low.
mm,
And that happens, it happens to the best of us. And even though I'm a Reiki master, and I have this like energy where I don't really absorb energy anymore. I used to absorb it a lot. Like, I remember just going to these big events like Asian weddings, there'd be like 600 people there, and I'd always feel so depleted afterwards.
mm,
And I'd have to have like a whole days of detox where I wasn't around people, because
mhm,
they made me feel so low, because I'd be absorbing all this energy. But because I then trained myself to not do that anymore, to protect my aura, I can now go to these events and, I don't take anyone's energies on because my energy is so strong and so imbalanced now that, whatever negative energy is around me, it stays there and that's it. So I think we need to, this is why, self care, your own practice is so important because you need to be able to protect your energy, whether that is like when you're around people, like proximity, or even over the phone, if people are being negative, if they're
Mm,
trying to bring you down about something. And come on, a lot of the time when people are bringing you down, it's not because they're an absolute success. It's because they're already beneath you. That was
mm,
one of Gary Vaynerchuk's quotes I remember. I was like, oh my God, yes, he hit the nail on the head. Because whoever brings you down,
mm,
just question yourself. Be like, are they doing better than me?
mm,
A lot of the time, they won't be, will they? Because if anyone's doing better than you, they haven't got the energy or the capacity to put you down because they're so busy living their own lives. So you need to elevate yourself. You need to elevate the people that you're hanging out with. Oh my
mm,
God, it's so important. How many times have we heard as well? We are the 5 people that we hang about with,
mhm,
and choose those 5 people wisely. And
mm,
if it's your mom or your brother who are just negative energy vampires draining you, then limit contact with them
mhm.
because it's gonna really affect you. It's gonna impact the way that you live your life. Find people who boost you, who lift you up.
Mhm.
So this is where boundaries are so important. So
Yeah,
important. Yeah.
yes. And the other thing I'll add is I agree with you 100%. Evaluate who are you spending time with and who are you investing time with. But what I found over the past several years is constantly evaluating that,
Yeah.
constantly, because people experience shifts just like we experience shifts. And we just need to be aware of what role are we playing, what role are these other people playing, and asking ourselves, okay, is this person still serving me, or the relationship feels a bit more one-sided or draining, and do I need to have a conversation about that, or do I need to perhaps have certain boundaries? So I think just the other piece I've learned is to constantly evaluate and be curious that how am I feeling now? Is it the same feeling that maybe was there before around feeling uplifted and now I'm feeling drained? So that can often give us more information too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I know a lot of people feel, that they have to be loyal to certain people that they
Mhm.
grew up with, their family members. And yeah, yeah, you can still be loyal. You don't need to lose contact with people, but it's that limiting the contact. I think that's really important because that's where
Mhm.
people really get confused as well.
Mhm.
And just that's what life's about. It's about growing and finding the people who are going to align with you to support the journey that you're on. And that's what
Yes.
life's about. It's about growing, it's about
Yeah.
networking and meeting new people. So
Yes.
embrace that.
100%. Anu, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing your story and the work you've done, not only on yourself, but how you're supporting others. I wish you best of luck in that endeavor and all the other projects you've got coming down the pipeline. But for listeners that want to learn more about your work, including your book, what are some ways they can find that?
Beautiful. Thank you so much again. I've loved this conversation. It went really deep and really insightful, and I hope it benefits your listeners.
Mhm.
And if anyone else would like to learn more about what I do, please do come along to social media. I'm quite active on social media on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And you can find my book on Amazon. And literally, if you just Google my brand name, Victim to Victor, with the number 2 and my name, Anu Verma, you should be able to find me on Google. I should be Googleable. So, yeah. So come on board. It would be great to connect with you all.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes, but thank you again for this chat. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And yeah, just everyone stay blessed.